neuroscience in the SLAM lab as well. And today I'm going to be talking about rhythm similarity and the factors that we can use to see why rhythms are perceived similar. So I pose the question, what qualities make one song sound similar to another? Well, we're going to take a throwback to Bach and listen to a snippet of a popular tune of his. Now we're going to listen to a 2008 pop song by One Republic, Secrets.
I need another story, something to get off my chest. My life is kind of boring.
Not the same, but oddly similar. So, what is causing us to make those connections?
Plagiarism?
Well,
Cellos.
well, this question is complex because music itself is very complex. But if we want to start tackling this question, we need to start somewhere, and so we're going to look at rhythms. And so integral to music is our ability to process patterns of onsets of sound as they unfold over time, in other words, rhythms. And several measurements exist that attempt to explain rhythm similarity. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about the specific factors that we'll be looking at, and these include edit distance, primacy and recency effects, as well as tempo. So, as I mentioned, edit distance is sort of a measurement, a popular measurement of rhythm similarity in the field, and the formal definition is the minimum number of insertions, deletions, or substitutions of rhythmic notations required to transform one rhythm into another. Now, it's important for our purposes that we're only going to be using this substitution rule because when you start introducing insertions and deletions, that inherently changes the meter of tempo, which is not a focus of this current study. So the substitution rule is pretty simple. Again, for those who don't have a lot of music experience, this is the rhythm notation of a pair of eighth notes. Now, using the substitution rule, I can substitute this eighth note for a quarter note. That's the notation for a quarter note. And it's important to note that I can only do this substitution rule rhythm notations that take up the same amount of time. So I can't substitute a quarter note for, say, a half note or a whole note. I can only substitute notations that take up the same amount of time. So according to this model, a large edit distance between two rhythms would equate to low similarity, while a small edit distance equates to high similarity. So as an example, say I want to calculate edit distance between these two rhythms. I'm going to start by looking at the first rhythmic notation of these rhythms, and I notice they're the same, so I'm going to leave them be. Again, moving on to the second rhythm notations, again, they're both eighth notes, so I'm going to leave those as well. I move on to the third rhythm notations of these rhythms, and I notice that they're different. So, using the substitution rule, I can substitute this quarter note for this eighth note, again, because they take the same amount of time, and that's going to count as one substitution. Moving on to the fourth beat, same thing. I'm going to substitute this quarter note for an eighth note, and that's going to count as a second substitution. Now, by doing that, you've now transformed this first rhythm into the second rhythm, and it took two steps to do that, two substitutions. So therefore, these two rhythms have an edit distance of 2. The second sort of factors that we're looking at in terms of rhythm similarity include primacy and recency effects. So as you may recall, the beginning and ending of a list are generally easier to remember than, say, the middle. And both of these effects have been observed in serial presented stimuli, including musical notes. And so we suspect that the serial position of notations in a rhythm may affect similarity, such that, if I look at this rhythm, the first notation and the last notation may be easier to remember and influence rhythm similarity more than the inner two notations. The last factor that we're considering is tempo, which is the speed at which rhythms are presented. It can be slow or it can be fast or anywhere in between. It's sort of a spectrum, and it's measured in beats per minute. So if we take a listen to, as an example, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, the beginning of the song sort of starts off slow.
My time has come, sent shivers down my spine.
Towards the end of the song, it picks up. which musical characteristics influence judgments of rhythm similarity. And the literature is pretty sparse and few comprehensive evaluations exist. So what we wanted to do was take all of these factors and evaluate the influence of edit distance, tempo, primacy, and recency effects on ratings of rhythm similarity. So the stimuli we used for this task, they were pretty simple with constant meter just containing eighth notes and quarter notes. Within the stimuli, we varied the edit distance between 1 and 4, again using only substitutions. And each rhythm was generated at 2 tempos each, one at a slow tempo, 90 beats per minute, and again at a faster tempo, 150 beats per minute, to create 16 total stimuli. So for this task, we recruited 10 subjects, and their mean musical experience was 17.3 years. And so during the task, each rhythm was randomly presented as all pairwise comparisons within and across both tempos. And so during the task, they would hear a rhythm pair and then rate their similarity as quickly as possible by pressing a number on a keyboard between 1 and 4, with 1 being most different and 4 being most similar. So for example, they would hear a first rhythm, followed by a second rhythm, and then they would press a number to rate their similarity. So in order to analyze this data, we performed what's called non-metric multidimensional scaling, which is called NMDS. And so this method takes this giant, messy matrix, and it sort of makes it into a graphic representation of the similarity between rhythms. This matrix just contains the average similarity ratings for each pair of rhythms. And so when we performed this analysis, it sort of generated a map illustrated here, where the distances between rhythms correlates to their their similarity ratings. And so rhythms that are closer together were rated as more similar than rhythms that were farther apart. So for instance, if we look at rhythm 1, rhythm 3, and rhythm 5, these rhythms are close together, so they're generally highly rated as highly similar. Now this map is great because it tells you what is similar, but it can't tell you why. That is something that you have to do by looking at the stimuli that you use, look at the characteristics of the stimuli, and sort of infer from this map why these rhythms were rated as similar. So if we look at this map in terms of edit distance, we can look at rhythm 3 and rhythm 5, which have a pairwise edit distance of 1, and they're fairly close together, which is to be expected. Again, a lower edit distance means you would have a higher similarity. Let's say we look at another rhythm pair with edit distance 1, not so close. Say we look at a rhythm pair with an edit distance of 2, pretty close together. In fact, almost comparable to rhythm 1 and rhythm 3. Another rhythm pair at edit distance 2, pretty far apart, comparable to rhythm 6 and rhythm 8. So the bottom line here is that the distances aren't consistent. You would expect that all rhythms with an edit distance of 1 would be close together, and all rhythms at an edit distance of 2 would be slightly longer. But that's just not the case here. If we look at this map in terms of tempo and looking at sort of bigger clusters of rhythms, we can look at the left side of the map, which has a giant cluster of rhythms all at slow tempos, and then the right side of the map has rhythms all at a fast tempo. If we look at it in terms of primacy, or the beginning of each rhythm, we find that the top half of this map contains rhythms clustered if they have a quarter note as their first rhythmic notation. And the bottom half of the map contains rhythms with their first rhythmic notation being eighth notes, or eighth note primacy. So this is great and all, but using these maps, we find that, okay, tempo and primacy may have an effect on rhythm similarity, edit distance maybe not so much, but is it significant? So we performed linear mixed effects modeling, which essentially takes a group of variables and determines if it's a significant predictor of another variable. So what we did was take these 6 variables, tempo, edit distance, primacy, recency, musical experience, and edit distance by primacy, to see if they were a significant predictor of similarity rating. This sort of edit distance by primacy is an interaction variable. We wanted to test edit distance as a main predictor of rhythm similarity, but we also wanted to see if edit distance could predict rhythm similarity if and only if primacy was shared between rhythms. And so what we found was that tempo, primacy, and edit distance by primacy were all significant predictors of similarity, while edit distance by itself, recency, and a subject's musical experience were not significant predictors of similarity. So what does this mean for edit distance? Well, it's far from perfect. It's been known that it's ignorant of meter and cultural influences on music, but it failed to predict similarity even when these factors were controlled. The model improved only when primacy was shared between rhythms, and this might be because it's easier to parse the minor differences between rhythms and the final beats of those measures. And overall, the model requires some modifications, perhaps in the form of assigning weights to different edit distance values. If you take a look at this figure here, it sort of shows the interaction of primacy on edit distance in terms of similarity rating. So if you look at edit distance 1, as edit distance increases, the effect of primacy decreases. So if you look at edit distance 1, when primacy was shared, the similarity rating is much higher, and it sort of tapers off for the higher edit distances. So that sort of implies that you may want to introduce a system where when you're calculating edit distance 1 perhaps has a higher weight when primacy is shared than when edit distance is 2 or 3, etc. In terms of rhythm primacy, so again, only the initial serial position of rhythms strongly affected rhythm similarity judgments, and this is without a complementary recency effect, which is sort of unique from most free recall tasks, which usually evoke both effects. So why is there only primacy? Why is it only present? So this may be because the initial rhythm patterns could provide important rhythmic context for the rest of a musical phrase, so perhaps that's why they're more memorable. Or it could tie into auditory working memory, where perhaps there's sort of a buffer that's engaged when you're listening to a rhythm or a musical phrase, and it's filled over time. And the ending of a musical phrase or rhythm is difficult to remember because at this point the buffer is full. Again, just sort of speculative, trying to explain why only primacy is present. In terms of tempo, one study found that there was no effect of tempo on song similarity, listening to entire songs. So this may be because tempo is superseded by non-temporal musical factors such as pitch or timbre in more complex environments. But when you're in a simple environment, just looking at rhythm similarity without those effects, tempo appears to be most robust. So where do we want to take this from here? Well, processing of tempo and rhythm both engage beat-based temporal processing networks in the brain, but it is unknown where in the brain rhythm primacy or potentially edit distance are represented. And so some stimuli from this experiment are going to be used in a future fMRI experiment to explore the neural correlates of these effects on rhythm similarity. Again, in the future, we also want to test edit distance with other calculations, insertions, and deletions in the context of meter for a full evaluation of the model. And again, testing rhythm similarity with meter manipulations in complex rhythms is something we want to pursue. So, now for questions.
Did you have any type of auditory mask in between the rhythms? Because I'm imagining that whatever you would hear first would be the beat that you have in your head, and if you immediately hear it afterwards, like you did in that example, then you'd still.
It wasn't immediate. There was a bit of a pause. There was silence in between each of the.
But no mask. But no masking.
No mask. No. It was you would hear the rhythm as it is, and then there would be a period of silence, and then you would hear as the second rhythm, and then the on-screen prompt would ask you to rate their similarity.
So you can imagine that somebody still has the beat going in their head afterward, and that's why you would have that extremely distinct sections on your MDS.
Did you test any other interaction terms in your model?
Yeah, we did test several others, including edit distance by tempo, which was found to be not significant. Only if we're looking just at edit distance and those interaction variables, only edit distance by primacy was significant, not edit distance by recency. Yeah. There's an interaction, yeah.
So I was thinking you could actually do an edit distance sort of analysis, but only using the first few nodes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Rather than just using interaction.
Mm-hmm. Something we could explore down the line. Yeah, this was sort of just exploratory, see if this model actually influences the similarities. Most of the previous literature hasn't done much testing of it. It's been more of a theory.
I just kind of comment on question. And this is very interesting. So that you can find any interpretable connection between edit distance and then the non-metric MDS. But another way you could think, if a computer scientist look at this, they would say that, well, maybe you can turn the table around because they use the one definition of edit distance. You kind of come up with a generalized edit distance so that what kind of edit distance definition would be highly correlated.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that still some sort of distance would matter, but the one they're using is not the one that actually, matters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sort of changing around.
Yeah.
Perhaps there's a different sort of.
To find the metric,
Yeah.
okay, that would highly correlate. The idea is that maybe the other measures of edit distance would really, it can account for this data very well.
Mm-hmm. Especially, and that's definitely why we want to explore insertions and deletions of edit distance to fully evaluate the model. But the only catch with that is that you're introducing meter, manipulating meter, which gets into a whole nother realm of temporal processing. So we wanted to avoid that in that study, but that's definitely something we want to explore in the future.
I was thinking about, in the absence of, when each node has identical entity, the first node almost on its own has an accent.
Because it's the
Not
first,
really-
it's the most,
it's
yeah.
not really avoidable.
Yeah.
I wonder if you included just a single accent node, if that would be heavily weighted.
You would
over
see
any
that would
other
be more memorable, that
sequence.
would influence rhythm similarity more than just say it's on the first, perhaps put an accent elsewhere.
Yeah.
And see if that
That might
influences
be
it.
a
Yeah.
real drive.
No, that's a great thought. Yeah.
Okay, when you're talking about edit distances, you're talking about choosing a quarter note for 2 eighths, right?
Mhm.
And that's an edit distance of
Yeah.
1. If you were to substitute that quarter note for 16th note, so that's still an edit distance.
Technically, yes.
One?
Yes, if it takes up the same amount of time. So if I were to substitute a quarter note for 4 16th notes,
See,
that's technically an
that's
edit,
one
but
of
that's
the
a
things I was looking at, because the stimuli that you have are all quarter note for 8th note. And I wonder if you would also see differences in rhythm similarity if you made bigger substitutions, even though that edit distance is still technically the same, but if you've taken between the
Yeah,
string.
yeah. A lot of the literature doesn't explore, okay, if it takes up the same amount of time, then sure, it's an edit distance of 1, but if
Right,
if it's,
distance
yeah,
changes.
yeah, the sort of the feel of the rhythm, sort of sounds different. So, yeah, that's definitely why we want to explore using more complex rhythms in terms of edit distance. These were just, pretty exploratory, simple rhythms, see if it actually manifests as an effect.
And I wonder if it would manifest more if they were